The goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. On this episode, I'm lucky enough to have Jim Bosiljevac. Jim is a major influence in not only my career, but countless aspiring advertisers and marketers around the country. He has spent time teaching at the Chicago Ad School, Miami Ad School, copywriting at Leo Burnett, directing creative at DDB San Francisco, and leading creative teams at Verizon Media. Now, he is the VP of Brand at Yahoo. He is also an adjunct professor at the University of Texas, Austin, teaching in their portfolio program. We discuss everything from the importance of finding your own voice as a creative to tools like AI and the future of our industry. Jim continues to lead many of the next great advertisers and marketers into the future, so be sure to tune in and soak in some of his wisdom. This is the Breaking and Entering podcast, and I'm your newest accomplice, Cooper Colvig. Kick it, Mikey. All right, awesome. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I like to start my segment off by, asking and getting some insight into the moment that you fell in love with marketing and advertising, and how you kind of got to where you are today from that moment.
Thanks, Cooper. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on. I think I would have to go back to when I fell in love with writing to begin with. When I was all the way back when I was a youngster, I was in fourth grade, and I had a teacher who encouraged us to write some stories for this contest. And I got to go to the Young Authors Contest and meet some published authors. And then that was kind of when I decided, like, oh, I like this writing thing, and wrote a bunch of short stories and would share them with friends on the bus. And in school, like, really liked the poetry and the writing classes. When I got to time to decide what did I want to do with my life, I was like, well, I want to be a writer. People were like, great, what kind of writer do you want to be? And I was like, I'm going to be a novelist. And they were like, great, what are you going to do for a career? And I was like, I don't know. I kind of like physics, and I'm okay at math, so maybe engineering. And so I ended up going to college to major in mechanical engineering. I hated it. Math and physics wasn't as fun at that level. Was still taking a bunch of film classes and creative writing classes, and just met somebody, a friend of mine, who just happened to be somebody I met in the dorms. And we were both sitting there doing homework one night, and I was trying to figure out multivariable calculus equations, and he was drawing pictures and writing funny headlines. And I was like, what is that? Because that looks much more interesting and more closely aligned to what I want to do with my life than this. And so I switched over. He was in the advertising program. I switched over, and that was kind of it. Like, I've always liked to make things. I've always liked to do creative things, whether it was just building weird stuff in the basement or drawing. I mean, I can draw okay. I'm not great at it, but I always liked that kind of stuff. And I just found my way into it. I think, like a lot of people do, very few people come in through the front door. There's a lot of side doors to this industry, and mine just happened to be when I was in undergrad.
Do you get to write it all now, or do you continue to even while you were still a student, or even making your way through the industry at the beginning?
I write a ton. Yeah. I mean, I write, like, it's just kind of a part of how I process things and what I enjoy to do. So I have, it's nice to be able to be a hobby short story writer, or writing that kind of stuff as a hobby on the side. And then I write a lot, I probably less so in terms of the actual work at work. Like, I'm not writing as many headlines as I did when I started off as a copywriter. But I'm seeing headlines, and I'm giving feedback on them. And I like to be involved. If there's any part of the the making that is closely like is my craft part of it. It's the writing and the word craft. Like I'm not a designer by trade. I've got a team that has a lot of designers on it and stuff like that. So I can give feedback, but I can't do that work. But the writing I can actually do if I need to, in
Yeah,
case of an
so
emergency.
outside of the actual, running the brand work at Yahoo, how often do you get to write, just for yourself or on the sides, and how important was that for you, or having that balance?
It's it's one of my outlets. I do, maybe I would say 2 or 3 nights a week. I might sit down and just at night before bed, write. I've got a daughter who's 11 and she's starting to get into, she really likes to draw. She's into animation. She likes to write. And so it's one of my treasured times is just sitting in the office together, dropping a record on and spending a little bit of time, just both of us kind of writing, separately, but in the same room. It's really nice. So and then I do just as one of my aside hobbies, I read a lot and I write book reports or book reviews of everything I've read, and I've been doing that for the last since 2000. So I've got 22 years of book reviews that I put on my blog, and it's not a big thing, but it you know keeps me moving words around, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, having that balance, I think for anyone is super important. And I'm curious, when you first kind of realized you could take writing and turn it into a profession, was that kind of a hump for you to get over, to get wrap your mind around not being able to write about exactly what you wanted to, or did that kind of get baked into your process as being a student copywriter?
It was, I think I brought myself not early on, not intentionally, but just kind of by default, because that was all I knew how to do was write my own kind of point of view. Like I have a kind of a weird sense of humor. I like quirky stuff. I grew up loving the Far Side. Like if you had to say like who, what were your biggest influences? I think Far Side comics were very influential on me, and I just loved that style. And so I kind of brought that weirdness to what I wrote. And then also whatever it was like in literature or fiction, stuff that was just kind of influential. And so I just kind of only knew really that's how I wrote. And so I wrote that stuff, and then people were like, "Oh, these make good ads too. They're funny and they're weird and they don't feel as much like ads. They feel more like jokes or cartoons." And then when I got so my first job was at Leo Burnett, and at one point I had one of the creative directors there looked at something I'd written, and he's like, "Well, you're writing. I've seen you write before. I've seen what you've written. Like when you're just goofing around writing stuff. This is not that. This is you trying to write ads. Where's the writing that is you writing your stuff?" And something just kind of clicked, and it was like, "Oh, okay, right. I'm here to write, not just mimic ads, but to write things that actually like are interesting and weird and quirky and all the stuff that I actually like, because that's what other people like too. They want to it's the great old Howard Gossage quote that people don't read ads, they read what interests them, and sometimes that's an ad. And I think if we approach it like, well, we're going to do an ad, then a lot of times it just ends up feeling like ads versus just, it's just an interesting bit of writing or something that's poetic or whatever.
Yeah, so now that you're at the point in your career where you're, directing a lot of that out of, either students at the University of Texas or within the Yahoo internal agency, um, how do you, every day try and get, that same, look and feel out of your students and colleagues when, it seems like there's a never-ending flood of content and things that feel like ads all the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not necessarily trying to get anything, I'm not trying to push my style or voice or anything on people. Like part of what I do, whether it's in the classroom or with the team at work, is like I want people to be proud of the work they do. In fact, we have like six values of the team, and number one is do work you're proud of. Not do work that I'm proud of. Like ideally I'm proud of it too, but I hired you, and so in that hiring, I believe in you. I trust in you, and I trust your sensibilities. I trust. So if you're doing work that you are proud of in your voice and that you think is funny or whatever, compelling or whatever moves you emotionally, whatever, then great. That's what we want, right? That then we've got a nice team. Everybody is excited and they feel some sense of ownership in what they're making, and it's their voice they're contributing to it. As I tell the students the same thing, right? Like, you're not doing a portfolio for me. Like, I've already got a job. I don't need to put together a portfolio, go out and get a job. Your portfolio represents you. So you need to figure out what your voice is, the same process I went through before. It's going to be different than my voice. I'll give you feedback on it. I'll tell you what I think is funny. But in the end, you have to decide and you have to figure out, like, this is my voice. This is the portfolio that I want representing me to get the job that I want to get, because somebody's going to hire me and say, do more of that stuff that you showed you in your portfolio. Let's see more of that and do it for us.
Yeah, that's really great. And obviously people developing their own voices are how we're going to progress the industry moving forward. For you, you had a very natural and clear path into, the writing segment of marketing and advertising. I feel like a lot of the people that I talk to and know are, attracted to the industry for a lot of the same reasons that you mentioned. They love to create things. It's a little bit more outside of the box. The list goes on. What's some advice for those people who don't have that natural calling towards maybe design or writing, looking to get their foot in the door?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different avenues in, and there, one of the great things about advertising is there are so many kind of diverse roles that people can play in the process. And so, so you might not be a craftsperson. You're not a designer. You're not a writer, but you're somebody who just loves being around creative, and you love film. Maybe you want to be a producer, or you're a psychologist at heart, right? And you just love to figure out what makes people tick, and you also have some creative side to you, or you like to be around it, right? You could be a planner. And so I think that um if you really are attracted to the industry and you're like, I want to be in this industry, I want to be in this environment, there's a lot of great things about it. Like, it takes really diverse thinking, and I don't mean, I do mean, but also, your traditional definition of, like, culturally diverse, racially diverse, gender diversity, age diversity, all that kind of stuff, but also just people who have just really different takes on things and different backgrounds and ways of thinking and expressing, right? Because part of the process is, at the beginning, we've got this thing that we're starting with, and we're going to spread out and we're going to explore as many different directions and avenues and ideas and all that. And when you have a bunch of, I've got a psychologist in the room, and I've got somebody who's out of the art world, and they're really, they're a painter that has somehow made it into our universe, into our team, right? This really interesting mix of people, you're going to get that spread of ideas. And so the industry should be, any creative team should be very welcoming to somebody who is passionate about it, wants to get in, and has an interesting take on it. And so it's not always that easy to get in. It's like people, oh, you're weird. We've never met anybody like you. Come on in. But you have something to offer, right? If you have a strong point of view, I think that passion and caring is really important. Insatiable curiosity. If you do want to be, if you want to be a writer, or you want to be an art director or designer, you do have to kind of work on the craft too. Like, that it's, so you can't get in. I know a lot of students, or I've talked to them over the years, where you're like, well, do you want to be an art director or a writer, or what do you want to be? And they're like, well, I can't draw, so I'll be a writer. It's like, no. That's not why you should be a writer. You should be a writer because you love to write. If you want to be an art director and you can't draw, learn to draw. Like, there are ways to learn this stuff. But I think there are so many ways to kind of play a role in the process, that you shouldn't be discouraged just because you're like, I don't see me on paper, looking for somebody exactly like you, because a lot of places don't know what they're looking for until they get somebody in the door.
That's a really interesting thought. I feel like a lot of times you read the job descriptions and it's very cookie cutter for a lot of the different roles. but then all of a sudden you read a strategist role at one agency versus another, and they're completely different. What are some ways that for students or any aspiring advertiser can get a better grasp of the different types of agencies, whether they're in-house, it's creative, it's performance, kind of while they're feeling super what's the word, distracted or daunted by the idea of all these different segments. What's some advice for kind of picking apart where their best niche within that world is?
Yeah. I think you can always reach out to people on the, these at the different places and hey, can I just pick your brain? Can I talk to you? Can I, there's starting to be more like this type of podcast or books, there are books out there. Junior Thomas Kemeny book is great. Luke Sullivan's book is great, and some of those are a little bit more geared toward traditional advertising and traditional advertising roles. I think the truth is any agency or internal team is going to have a slightly different flavor to it. But at least those kind of ground you, right? Like these are the types of roles. This is how the machine works. Yes, the gears are going to be slightly different at different places, or the culture is going to be a little bit different. But that's at least a good place to start. And then the other thing I would just say is like go find the work that you love, right? Like I was just talking to somebody earlier and they were trying to narrow down the type of agency that they want to work at. And they knew they wanted to work at an advertising agency. I'm like, well, you got to narrow it down from just any agency anywhere, right? Like just give yourself a little bit more of a brief, even if the brief is, well, my girlfriend lives in New York, and so I want to live in New York or something like that. Okay, now you've at least narrowed the field down. But I think another great way to do it is like go find the work that you love to do. Like, what is your favorite advertising work? And I give my students an assignment that is to build a dream portfolio. And I can't remember who I stole this from, but I stole this from some other advertising teacher. But all a dream portfolio is you go out in the world, you find all the work that you love, and you put it together on a Pinterest board, and you're like, this is the work if I could make any portfolio piece out of, put them all together, this is what I would have put together, would love to aspire to, whatever. Go back to that. Who made that stuff? Where are they? There's a list for you to kind of start, because I think the inner workings, is it a performance agency? Is it a more production shop? Do they do more TV? Whatever. Like all that stuff can get very complicated, and it can also change depending on the clients, depending on the leadership, depending on what the economy is doing at the time, right? But if you can find pieces of work and you're like, okay, that creative director did 3 of my favorite pieces. How do I get somewhere in their orbit or work for them? Then you're, I think, much more likely to land at a place that you're like, this is I'm doing the kind of work that I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times people lack the direction for, even building out the portfolio work after having built that first piece of it. And, we're seeing more and more on the rise, big influencers within the industry who have their own classes and workshops. You have places like Miami Ad School, where you once were VCU Brand Center, and then you have universities where they're starting to build out their ad and communications programs to function like an agency. How has that been influential for your students, and how has it been for you being able to kind of build that out, at least on the portfolio side of things at the University of Texas?
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of experimenting with the right, basically what is going to be the most appealing to employers, to agencies, and also, related obviously is what's going to prepare the students the best. And there's kind of 2 parts of it. One is the learning the craft, just literally learning, like, how does an idea work? How do you write a headline? How do you design an ad? How do you, the visual hierarchy, typography, all those craft things. And those alone can be like 4 years of learning and more. It's actually like a lifetime of learning. You can still continue to get better at that stuff. And so I think then balancing that with, okay, now how do we put some real world type experience here. And this is when you get some of the, Texas UT has a lab and campaigns classes, and VCU is the brand center. They were kind of set up with the idea of like, let's try to be like an agency where you've got the teachers are the creative directors, and the people are all in the hallway, and they're showing ideas to each other, and like you would at at an agency. And I think that's great in terms of just, it's a little bit more fluid. It's very messy. It can be very messy. You've got different disciplines all coming together and working together. And I think that's really the part that all of a sudden feels very different than I'm sitting in a class with a bunch of other copywriters or copywriters and art directors, and we're cranking out ads. Okay, now I have a strategist who's going to come in, and they're going to infuse some cultural knowledge and consumer research, and they're going to question some of the things that we were like, oh, this is really funny, isn't this clever? And they're like, no, that actually is the wrong appeal. It has totally off strategy, right? And that's what an agency is like. You've got people around you who are pushing to make sure the work is on strategy, to make sure maybe you've got some of these kind of academic agency setups. Well, you got a client, UT does this. We bring in real clients for some of these classes. And now you have to pitch to the client, and you've got an account person who's managing that relationship, who's going to come back and say, you're missing part of the brief here, and the client's expecting this. Or, hey, did you consider this? The client told me this the other day. Maybe that sparks an idea. Like that sort of, you're not in a bubble anymore. And I think that's really, really valuable, because you don't want to, necessarily be walking into an agency for your first job, and it's the first time you've ever had any experience with a strategist or an actual client. If you can get that experience early, it's really valuable. The coming up with the work, which is what all the craft stuff focuses on, is a fraction of the job. And so if that's all that's good. It's fine. You need to know that, but there's so much more.
So when you've kind of progressed from, the outside the walls of whether it be school, your own portfolio building on the side and your network, or even working at a portfolio school, and you are making your way towards the industry, or even into the industry, what are ways for people to, you mentioned lifelong learning, continue to, continue to sharpen those skills, whether it's in the actual like tactical pieces like you just kind of mapped out, or just even as a thinker? What are some ways that you kind of bring the educational side of things back towards, agency life and continued, pursuit of excellence, or, just being better as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I used to say, when I worked at this one agency, I would be like, I think we need to be more like a school, and people are like, what do you mean we're not a school, we're an agency? But what I meant by that was, you have the opportunity every day. You walk in and you're like, what am I going to make today? And then you make something, and if you're a creative person, like that's what you want to do in life. You want to make something. And then once you make something, you have the opportunity to step back and, okay, what did I learn from that thing? Right. And what happens at a school is just that, like, here's an assignment, make something. We're going to tell you what we think of it. We're going to evaluate it. You're going to learn from it. And then you're going to do it again. You're going to make something else. Right. And in a school, the whole thing is like, it's a very safe environment, right? You don't have clients. This is not your job. You're learning how to do this stuff. So you should be taking risks, experimenting, trying a bunch of things that fail, because each time you fail, we've all heard, like, the more you fail, the more you learn, all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that kind of gets squeezed out when you get into the quote unquote real world of an agency, because they're like, well, okay, yeah, fail's good. Like, let's celebrate the big swings and yada yada. But actually, let's just deliver on this brief because the client needs it by, 5 o'clock today, whatever. And I think bringing back that idea of, look, we're all here to get to learn, to experiment, to make things and learn from it, and share that learning with each other. One of the things I do at Yahoo with our department is our department meetings, and just kind of our whole ethos is built around having good relationships with our stakeholders, making good work for them, and then telling those stories. And so we just had a department meeting today. It's about 60 people or so, where we had two presentations from teams. This was what we made, and importantly, this is what we learned from it. And I think you need to have that, because more than anything, I think, people are like, oh, I want to make a lot of money, or I want to like have lots of power. Like, no, not really. Like, money and all that kind of stuff is fine, but what people really want to do is they want to feel like they're growing. They want to feel like they're moving forward in their careers, and they're taking on new challenges. And those challenges and the way they're growing, that could be like, I'm putting new stuff in my portfolio, or maybe I'm sitting next to somebody who just knows a lot of stuff, and I'm constantly being taught just being around them, or I'm producing things, and I've never done a food shoot before. I've never shot a car, or I've never done a TikTok video, right? Like, there's all kinds of different ways to learn things. And if somebody feels like they're in a place where they're constantly growing, similar to the way you feel at a school, then you got a really good, vibrant culture. And that retains people as much as, here's a promotion, or here's more money. Like, again, that stuff is fine, and you should be paid fairly and get your title where it should be. But like, it's really about building building your career and growing. And so, to me, that aligns very much with like just how a school runs, where you walk in and you walk out smarter than you were in the morning.
That's really interesting. Yeah. At my agency, we call our team the lab, because we're consistently, experimenting, trying new things, and pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, just to where, we're still able to do, like, make great things, but not actually fall flat on our faces. And I think a lot of the greatest shops around the country and the world are doing all of the same thing, and able to kind of, keep everyone within that sweet spot, progressing and making great work, while creating, a place where people also feel safe at the same time, is really cool.
Well, and that
So
that that sorry, step on you, but that, like, just there was this whole thing about, for a while, with agencies, and I think still somewhat, of what is it called. I felt like every agency website for a while was like, we're not an ad agency. It's like, well, okay, debatable, but sure. What are you? And then, just calling something a lab, or calling something a studio, or calling something else, kind of sets a different expectation. I think that's really good. Like, labs are meant to go and experiment, right? Like, that's what you do in a lab, right? A studio is, you go and you make stuff, and you're just generating content. Like, that's what a studio does. And so I think, while some of it is somewhat, I think, performative, and people trying to carve out their own white space for their agencies, it does set expectations of what happens there. And then it just depends on, do you have the relationship with your clients or your stakeholders who will respect that and understand that that's an important part of the process. Like, if you want really good work, you got to have space to play, and you got to have space to make mistakes. And there's gonna, somebody comes in, you got to be like, this is messy in here. You can't freak out. If you're going to come into our studio or our lab or whatever, you're going to see a lot of mess, and you got to be okay with that.
that's really interesting, especially when you bring up the client side of it, where, I know while I was finishing up school at CU, no one could, make a 2 or 3 sentence statement about marketing or advertising without saying data driven. I feel like we're we're
Yes.
we're moving past that point a little bit too, and there are some other really cool and fun topics to touch on there. But knowing that there is a level of accountability that's unprecedented within the industry right now, and is a great way to, prove effectiveness and actually show that experiment. I know a lot of clients haven't bought into that mindset that you kind of described. So for people coming into the industry, or people already in it who are kind of navigating those waters, how have you done it successfully, and how has that gone?
I mean, a lot of it is, uh, it's just old fashioned relationship building, and building trust, and kind of proving it out over time. And really, I mean, because it's not like, it's not a, okay, well, the client really is putting the screws to us, and that's the problem. Like, the problem is they don't understand what the benefit could be, or we don't understand how to solve their problems because we're not, in their shoes. And so I think building that relationship and really spending the time to understand, you know, whether it's on a business level, it should be at a business level. Like, what are you trying to do with the business? What are your biggest challenges? What are you trying to do with the brand? What's the vision for the marketing? But also then on a personal level, like, what kind of work does this person, be a client or stakeholder or whoever it is, like, do they like? And can I, as a somebody coming out of the ad world or the creative world, help have a conversation? Educate them feels condescending, but expose them to the kind of work that I like, and see how that sits with them, right? Like, is this the kind of work that they want to do? And then you can start to get into the conversations around, okay, so if we're doing all, I'm just going to say, we're doing all this like really performance based work. It's like, oh, we've got a factory over here and we're just cranking out, thousands of these like really straightforward ads, and we're looking for an opportunity to take a bigger swing, to do something that is a bigger impact, is going to get more notice, a little more creative, whatever. Let's say that shorthanded. Let me have that conversation with them and say, how do we get to this? What is what the benefit of this could be? And just see where they are, because you might have a client who's just like has zero appetite for that. But it has to start with the relationship. When I was a junior, I really, I'm also introverted, and so I was like, I wanted to go in, I wanted to present my work, I wanted them to see the brilliance of the idea, buy it, and then I could go produce it. And wasn't really that invested in the relationship. And it wasn't until I got on this assignment, I was writing radio for the Beef Council, and I would fly out uh, to LA and meet with the client. And then Sam Elliott was our talent, which was a whole another amazing experience. But I would spend a lot of time with just the client, and we would just chat and have lunch and stuff. And they were great, but getting to know them on a personal level, so that then you could have those conversations where if they're trying to push back against a creative idea, you can kind of say, hey, come on, let's do it, like, this could be cool, like, and have a conversation at a little bit more of a human level, versus what happens a lot, which is you walk in, I'm going to sell you, I'm going to pitch this to you across the table, and then you're going to give me feedback, and then I'm going to go off and address your feedback. The relationships are really important, and I think especially early on in a career, they can kind of be neglected.
Interesting. So I know you spent a lot of time educating. You spent time on the agency side and are now again on the client side. And one of the questions I was always asked when I was trying to, navigate really early on out of school was, well, do you want to be client side or do you want to be at the agency? And my response was like, I would scramble for a while and be like, shit, I don't know. What's the difference? And what do you have to bring to the table differently at each of those? And you've kind of had your foot or toes fairly deep in each of those pools. How did that kind of, or those experiences help shape, what you've built and brought to the client side at Yahoo in general? And how, what advice would you have for folks making that switch or being asked that same question I was at the beginning of my career?
Yeah. So I'll come back around to my advice I would give on like where you'd want to start. I think the biggest thing, and it depends on the client too, or what business you're in. The biggest thing to me was when I was at the agency, and I was at DDB in San Francisco before I had a 6 months of freelance or whatever, and then ended up at Yahoo. Everybody was, around advertising. Like, we were all advertisers, like, and everybody kind of knew creative. We were at least, and the people we dealt with at the client, they were marketers. So everybody kind of spoke the same language. We had a common way of talking, a common way of doing things, a common way of thinking about brands and branding and all that kind of stuff. When I went to Yahoo, I mean, Yahoo's it's a massive company, and it was mostly not marketers. Like, we had a decent sized marketing team, but most of the people that I would see in the cafeteria or talk to or whatever were, they were engineers, or we have pretty robust editorial teams that were like, writing articles for Yahoo Sports or Yahoo News or whatever. And it, in those conversations, you kind of realize, oh, they're not speaking the same language. They're not marketers. They don't necessarily think of brands at all. They don't understand or think of advertising other than mostly their consumer experience if they see ads on TV or they see ads on the internet. But they're not really thinking about how they're made, right? Because that's not their world. Their world is like they're building product, or they're on a studio set, like talking to a camera, like doing other things. And I don't understand what they do. Like I could like, they would look at us sometimes and be like, wow, you guys are like, this is magic almost, right? And I'd be like, well, what you do is magic to me. And so to me, it was really a huge opportunity to really learn a lot and have an appreciation for what other people do and how this all sort of fits together. And also I think partly because of my role, but also partly because being in the business on the client side, you can be much further upstream and closer to how the marketing strategy is developed. When I was at the agency, it was like marketing strategy was baked. Usually the advertising and creative strategy was baked, and the planner would come present it to us, and then we'd go off and make ads. Now I can talk to the people who are developing the products, and I can ask them questions, and we can kick around ideas around how we might position this for the consumer. And sometimes I might have a product idea, or somebody on my team has a product idea, and we just send it over and we're like, hey, we just thought of this thing, and every once in a while they'll implement it. And so just being that close to the the business, and being around it, I think you can have a bigger impact. But it also at times feels like this is not creative. This is business, because it's business, or it's product or engineering and stuff like that. So I find it fascinating. I love the switch. I love the diversity of people that I interact with every day. But I also sometimes have to step back and go, okay, I need to explain this without a bunch of marketing jargon or thinking that they understand how any of this works. I need to kind of, you know, again, not sound condescending, but I kind of need to educate them on how does marketing work, how does brand work, or what happens when we leave the room and go away to do our thing, like what's actually happening.
Yeah, that's very cool. Does it ever get a little like muddled when you have the ability or access to get into the pool of product and influence, the other direction, what's going on the business side and the product side? Or how do you kind of balance those two worlds on the client side?
I don't know that it gets muddled. I mean, because I don't know how much influence I have. Like I can throw out ideas. There's certainly things that I've input on that have kind of impacted the business a certain way. But I think being around it and going back to that relationship and understanding, right? Like I want to have as much of an understanding of what's happening on the business as possible. Because then when I'm looking at creative, it's all going to inform that. And I think that benefit is any kind of like of it getting muddled or weighed down, or like me having the thing in my head, well, this isn't right, so it's like putting a damper on the creativity or anything like that. And I think just in general, like all of us, if we're working on creative in any form, have to be able to switch modes and have to be like, forget everything you know about what's right for this. Let's just think and talk about what's possible. What could this be? And at that point, I think everybody's got to shut off, like, well, so and so is not going to like it, or the client doesn't like that kind of thing, or people want the color blue in this, or whatever it is. Like let's just think about what this potentially could be. And then later we'll have all that knowledge because we've been in those conversations around the business. And so when we start to narrow down the ideas we've come up with and decide what's right, we have some really, hopefully thoughtful and criteria that we can apply to those decisions. I do want to get back, because I didn't answer your question about like client side or agency side if you're starting off. I would say, and this might be a little controversial, but I would say if you're a creative, you probably want to go agency side first. only because of the variety. Like when I was at the agency, like you're just cranking through work. Like you're getting projects, you're producing work. Even like TV assignments, a lot of times it was like 3 months start to finish and you're done. On the client side, things tend to be like a little bit longer time horizon because you're engaging with them earlier, and so it feels like this arc takes a little bit more and maybe a little bit less variety depending on the whatever the businesses or the brand is that you work on. I will say you should make your decision where you want to go based on, again, the kind of work that you want to do, the kind of opportunity you're going to have to grow, and the kind of people you're going to be around. And that could really be anywhere. There are plenty, especially now, there are plenty of, client side teams or, in-house teams that are doing some of the best work around. Is coming out of some of those teams. So if you can get in one of those, like definitely, don't. I don't know that I would necessarily make up my mind if I think I would be open to either, and whatever opportunity feels like the work you want to do or closest to the work you want to do, I would go for that regardless of client or agency side.
And then it sounds like for those who, maybe aren't entirely sure or have a broad spectrum in their own mind of, what that work could kind of look like, the agency side provides that breadth of, experience or potential experience where you can kind of get your hands on all sorts of kind of work to kind of, either help build your portfolio or, craft your own, figure out your own adventure as you go through it.
Yeah, totally. And I think just getting exposed to some of that stuff, like the more opportunities and the more varied opportunities. Like when I started off at Leo Burnett, and we had, so in the entire agency there were, I don't know how many groups, like maybe 5 or 6 groups, so kind of mini agencies. And my mini agency, we had an airline, we had the US Postal Service, we had a restaurant, we had McDonald's. I did work on beef. I did work on Kellogg's cereal. I don't know, number of other things. And it's just so in that, like, I don't know how many different, industries that is, but like there's a lot, and I think you wouldn't get that right now, like at Yahoo, like we have Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Finance, Yahoo itself, Yahoo News, Yahoo Mail. And so there's like interesting properties for sure. And we have a couple other brands, TechCrunch and AOL, and but they're all media brands. They're all in the tech space and stuff. So we don't have any airlines that I work on. So anyway, I think to your point, you're gonna get more variety at the agency.
Yeah, sounds like really just depends on the client side too. To your point, Yahoo has a pretty wide breadth, but um, some don't have quite as large of a scope. So if you're, an aspiring advertiser, marketer, you understand that you need a portfolio. You're learning and bringing in projects to yourself somehow, whether it's through class or on your own. You kind of have that mood board of work that really inspires you and those ideas in your head. And as you're kind of thinking towards that next step, whether it's on the agency side or the client side, and you're following these agencies and brands and businesses on LinkedIn and Twitter or wherever else, and every day you get on there and scroll and you see post after post talking about AI and how it's playing a role in work today. What does that mean for up and coming and inspiring advertisers, and how do you see, tools like AI within the industry?
Okay, so I'm gonna go to, this is like one of the first, regardless of whether I'm teaching a script writing class or a portfolio class, the place that I start is understanding the process and understanding, I alluded to it earlier, of look, the first thing you're going to do after you've got your brief and you sit down is you're going to come up with as many ideas as you can, right? And so you're going to, what could this possibly be? The divergence phase. And it looks like if a tree kind of turned on its side, where it's just branching out, and you're taking these ideas and these insights and you're building on them, and you're using all your improv skills, like, hey, what if we did this? Oh yes, and we could do this. And you're basically filling the wall with ideas. that's your first phase. Your second phase then is going to like looking at all these ideas, moving around, circling the ones that you like, maybe some combining and starting to narrow down. And then you're going to take those and you're going to craft them. That's your third part of that. And this is iterative, right? So you're going to do this time and time again. You might sit down, come up with ideas for a couple hours. You go away, have coffee, you come back, you look at them, you narrow them down, you write a couple scripts. Tomorrow you come back, you do the same thing with that same wall. So in that process, that first phase of just coming up with a bunch of ideas, you want this to be your like highly caffeinated, energized, non-critical brain, right? Like somebody told me one time, you should write drunk and edit sober. And I don't know if that's great advice, but the spirit of that is right? Like you need to have these two sides. You need to turn off your editor or put away your eraser and just generate, and then you can come back and decide what's right. And so to me, AI, and I've only played with it a little bit, but it's an amazing tool for generation and for just you here's a thing. And if I said, hey, what if we did something with birdhouses and we turn these birdhouses into like planters, and I toss that to you, you could be like, oh yeah, cool. And you could have flowers and it would look like, if I tossed it to AI, it'd be like, here's like 15 pictures of that. Oh, and this one is really interesting, what it did with this structure. What if we built off that, right? So just as a generative technology, I think it's really, really interesting. Also, if I just I need to make a comp real quick, right? I just need to go into a client meeting and I need to show something that looks semi-professional, and I can't Google and find a chicken riding a purple giraffe anywhere. I might be able to type that into AI. Okay, cool. Now I got it, and we can go. So I think there's time saving. There's that generative thing. What juniors are often used for at agencies is that generative place, the generative part of the process. And this is why I tell students, right, when you're putting your portfolio together, take big swings. I want to see risky stuff in your portfolio. I got plenty of people on the team who I'm like, hey, can you crank out this script, and somebody can write it and be like, cool, that's good, let's go. What I want from a junior is to bring something that like, holy cow, I never would have thought of that. Like, so if I can see that in your portfolio, that you can come up with ideas that are out there and make sense strategically and stuff, but are also like really provocative ideas, that's great. I want to throw you into the mix that we've already got going on, because you're going to cover a different ground on that wall, that generative thing. So, and now you're kind of competing. The role that you're playing is kind of competing with AI. And I don't think AI is there quite yet, but like that's the part of the process where you're real valuable as a junior, right? The creative director's role is going to be more the one that starts to narrow things down and gives you direction on how to craft it and make it happen. So I think what that forces is, as you're coming out of school or as you're coming into the industry, you need to provide value beyond, I can come up with wild ideas. I can come up with, you need to, you need to understand strategy. You need to be able to articulate your idea and why it's the right idea. You need to connect it back to the strategy, or connect it back to the business challenge, or connect it to a consumer insight. One of the things when I have my portfolio class is somebody will get up and they'll walk through their work, and then I always turn to the class and I'm like, what do you think? Because part of what I want people to take away from that class is not just they learned how to come up with ideas, but they could look at somebody else's ideas and articulate what's good about it, how it could get better, how to improve it from an executional standpoint, or is there an insight that's missing or not quite connecting or something like that. I don't know that AI is anywhere near. I mean, I say this kind of stuff and then be proven wrong, but like, I don't know that AI is anywhere near being able to do that part of the job. AI can totally come up with ideas right now and just lots of random ideas way faster than I can. So, as a tangential story, maybe one time when I was at DDB, we had a bring your kid to work day, and we brought the kids in. We thought it would just be a kind of a fun exercise. Hey, let's see what your parents do at work. And so we brought them in and we did a brainstorm with them on Ready Whip, the whipped cream and a can thing. And the ideas they came up with were so good because they were just in a we were in that mode of just coming up with ideas, and there were things that we never would have thought of at all. And they like immediately came up with this idea of this unicorn that has one of those, the dispenser top as its horn. It sports out Ready Whip, and it's had a name Rudy or something like that. And because their whole world is just, unicorns are like number 3 on their list of every young kid's, what they're thinking about. But like throwing that into the mix just was took us somewhere we never would have gone naturally. I think AI could do that. When you bring in juniors again, to like that's the main role at first.
That's really cool. So if I am that entry level or junior level creative coming into this world, knowing that I'm battling against all of the different or other juniors and creatives out there, and now there's this thing out there, scary thing called AI that I'm seeing all across the web and in every industry, everywhere. It really sounds like to me what I'm hearing from you and even what I'm seeing out in the world that, it's obviously a hugely important thing to be aware of and keep your finger on the pulse of. But to your point, you have to be, strong across the entire business and a student of the entire business so that you know where that falls in, kind of making yourself not one dimensional as that source of ideas, but, someone who can bring, different pieces to the table across all the different segments, maybe not at, depth across all of those, but at least to where, you can be dangerous and see where it plays in.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's when I look at portfolios, what I look for. I mean, I look for like, big ideas, exciting ideas, things that are provocative that I've never seen before. I look for craft, but I also look for the depth of thinking. Like, has this person gone beyond an execution or even if it's a campaign, gone beyond the executions? Is this really rooted in something that is makes sense for this business or makes sense at this cultural moment? And that's the thing to me that's really gonna separate somebody from just all the other people who have like portfolios of executions.
Yeah, build I mean, even to your point with AI, you can have it think laterally and put purple and giraffe together and dispenser and unicorn like the kids are bringing up, but it's going to probably struggle to bring that context, the strategic thinking, the world that we live in, and even the industry that we're playing within to, really bring those kinds of ideas to life. So it could even be, a tool for juniors and aspiring advertisers to, potentially even up their game, trying to, come up with new crazy ideas and, build out their own portfolios or find success at their own agencies.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's a tool. It's available to everybody. I can't remember who it was the other day. I saw somebody's got a whole section of their agency now they're going to dedicate to it, to AI and really, utilizing the potential of AI. It's another tool. It's great. I mean, I think I wouldn't be scared of it. I would learn it and figure out how to utilize it and put it to work for you.
So to, finish up here, and we're talking about AI and a thing that's going to continue to progress over the years, and who knows how it will take shape. But I'd love to get your insight on where you see our industry going in the next 5 to 10 years, and how students and aspiring advertisers can be thinking about that in ways to, bring something more to the table, or, maybe they're just important things to keep in mind for someone to look into while they're getting into the business.
Yeah. When I think back on the different trends that have kind of come and gone, and some of them have stuck a little bit more, and like AI now is kind of it's the thing. And a minute ago it was the metaverse and NFTs and all that stuff. And if you go back like whatever 10 years ago, everybody wanted to have some sort of like vending machine. Like every pitch anybody worked on, a new business pitch, had a vending machine idea in it. Like it was just this weird kind of fad for a while. And then you go back, whatever, 5 years before that, it was like an app. Everybody had an app idea in their pitches, and student books, everybody had an app. And so I think those things kind of come and go. And, I had some students that just did this campaign, and it was all metaverse based, and I thought it was really rooted in the history of this brand that they're working on, and it made sense. Normally, if I saw something like that, I would be like, it feels like you're kind of jumping on the fad. It's not really deep. I think what has always been meaningful, and I think will continue to be, regardless of, I don't know what the next technology will be, right? Like, I'm hoping we're not all wearing VR headsets and walking around, and so everything is going to be this immersive, whatever. We'll see. Some sort of futurism,
Some Ready Player One.
some Ready Player One type, future. I might opt out, but what always comes back to is like, if I'm a consumer, do I feel like you understand me at this moment, and what I either need or respond to or want to feel, and whether it's your appeal to me in your ad, or it's your product that you've designed, or a feature of your product, is it something that I'm like, oh, you get me, like, I love that, like, that's so great, right? And I think we see, like, great advertising is makes me feel something, or it makes me think something in a new way. And maybe, makes me like weepy, like, I saw this ad, and reminded me of my relationship with my daughter, and it was really connected with me on that level. Or the other ad I just think is so hilarious, and it made me laugh. And if you can, that 30 seconds that you just took from my life while I waited for my show that I actually want to watch, you provided me with a laugh. Now I like you more. I feel good about your brand. Or, when I go to log into somebody's Wi-Fi on my Apple phone, and it asks the person, would you want to let this person on your Wi-Fi, instead of me having to type in the password, you know, like, all of those things. And that's obviously, like, that's a product feature. That's not an ad, but I'm like, oh, you get me. You just solved the problem. I love you, Apple. Right. And those little things, I think, those are all very human. Some of them can be very small gestures. I think that's where we're going to always be. I think the more we try to shove things in people's face, or bombard them with something, or our algorithm says the eighth time we show you this message, you're gonna finally click on, like, no, like, that's not what people want, right? Like, I think the idea that we have paid for this, and so we are going to stick something in your face because we've paid for it, is erroneous. It's a lot of what advertising obviously is based on. But I think you have a much better experience with the brand, and you do a lot better work if I can be helpful and generous, and actually, like, add to somebody's life or what they're trying to do at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really easy with all of these new topics and shiny acronyms, as we get bombarded with them day to day, to kind of get lost within all that, and forget about the humans on the other end of the screen. And to know that that's the thinking at a place like Yahoo is a breath of fresh air, and something that I think everyone should keep in mind, whether you're in marketing or advertising as a whole. And kind of on that, I know, Jim, your portfolio class at the University of Texas just finished up their final pitches. If you'd like to talk about that at all, or kind of talk about ways that folks within the industry could help out your students, and finding their own way within the industry, that'd be really great.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, we have, so it's the Texas Creative Portfolio Program. It's at UT, and it's, there are 4 portfolio classes in the sequence, and I teach the portfolio 2 class. So I teach the second one in the sequence, and we, at the end of every semester, we have outside critiquers that come in and look at all the campaigns that the students have done. So there were 30 campaigns out of my class. We had 2 fantastic critiquers that came in and critique the work, and now the students are going to take some time off, and then they're going to regroup and figure out what they're going to keep in their portfolio, what they're going to fix, and then what they're going to leave behind. And these are students, and I think we all at some point had somebody in our lives that whether it was in our careers or whatever, that opened a door for us or put a door in front of us, and whether we chose to open it or but at least helped us out, right? And these students they're starting off their journeys, and they're always looking for people to either pick their brain, or can I ask you some questions about the industry, or I love your agency, can I ask you some questions about you and the work you've done? Can you look at my portfolio? Can you make a connection for me? All that kind of stuff. There's lots of ways to help out. I am always looking for, people to come in and critique, or we're looking for speakers to come in and talk to the students. One of the things that when I was just starting out, I was 2 years into my career, and somebody asked me if I wanted to teach at Chicago Portfolio School. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to teach them. I've only been doing this for 2 years. And they were like, no, you know more than they do. It'll be fine. And I kind of freaked out that first class, because I was like, oh, actually, I don't know if I do. But it turned out it was fine. There's a music school in Los Angeles that has the motto, if you only know 3 chords, teach somebody who knows 2. And so whether you are in the industry for a year or 2 years or 20 years, like, there's something that the students can learn from you. And all I want to do is try to make as many of those connections as possible. So I would just say, if you're interested in helping out the program, if you're interested in helping out students, if you're interested in any of those ways that I mentioned, reach out to me, hit me up, and I will happily take you up on it. And the students would be forever grateful. Just sometimes it's a random comment or a random door that gets put in somebody, and that's all they needed for their entire career. And 20 years later, they're like, dang, I remember when so-and-so told me this one thing, and it was the best advice. It changed my life. You never know what that little bit of advice is going to be. So we welcome it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, as you know, you were one of those people for me, and unbeknowingly provided me with a relationship that ended up being, one of my great mentors early in my career. It's been, really great to chat through all these different topics with you, pick your brain, and hopefully, everyone out there gets to pull some of that knowledge out and use it for themselves. I want to wish you a happy holidays, and thank you again for hopping on the show.
Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest. Thank you so